They're called SOEs, or state-owned enterprises, and they make up a huge part of China's economy. The government has announced guidelines to reform them. CCTV's Daniel Winchez tells us what it all means.
Well, SOE, it's pretty simple. It's a company or a group of companies, either partially or wholly owned by the government. That's a state-owned enterprise. And recent data indicates there are about 150,000 in China, of which the central government owns 50,000 and local governments 100,000. They directly employ somewhere in the region of 37 million people.
So there's a big push to reform them. Why?
Well, the push is that it's in China's own economic interest, fundamentally, to make these changes to the structure of its economy. In the case of steel production, for example, there's been a lot of overproduction, overcapacity. So in those heavy industries, state-owned enterprises are likely to continue, but in a more controlled, more consolidated way. Then, where the government wants to encourage more competition, for example, in aviation or telecoms, you're likely to see more encouragement of the private sector. And then in some areas, high-end innovation, for example, such as computer technology, the private sector is generally better placed to lead those industries through market-based incentives. SOE.
So, Daniel, what are the proposals on the table? What's being proposed right now, basically?
Well, this is not a fundamental shift. It's more of a graduated shift. China's issued a set of new guidelines designed to bring about reforms by 2020. The major plank of this will be encouraging more mixed ownership. So you'll see private companies and individuals taking stakes in some state-owned enterprises. This will not be a forced process, though. Some will be encouraged to restructure. Some might eventually float on the stock market. But in any case, even if a state-owned enterprise doesn't change ownership, it will still be encouraged to reform in its corporate management structure, which will be the idea of encouraging the government to have much less of the direct management involvement and more a hands-off approach.
So then, technically speaking, how big of a change is this, Daniel?
It's a major shift in the way in which the Chinese manage their economy, but the major shift is a long-term one, SOE, and I'll describe this. It should be seen as part of a continuum rather than a shift as it per se is just at this moment. So, for example, you saw in the 1980s some big moves to modernize their state-owned enterprises, essentially privatized and forced to be much more innovative. The reforms don't oblige state-owned enterprises to change, but President Xi earlier this year urged fast and steady implementation. There are a lot of vested interest in the state-owned enterprise sector. So I think this must be seen not something that's about short-term reactions to the market economy, but long-term changes to the structure, which are essentially in China's own economic interests.
Nicely explained, sir. Thank you so much.